earthquake stopped as well. So my opponent keeps coming out and talking about these risks of research. But judge, what is a risk of research here? We really don't have that. We don't know, especially when he bases his whole case off of the use of fracking, that there's any risk in that. Really, the risk in fracking is through the use. And finally, I want to talk about this last point today, is that it's actually unregulated. According to Cornell University and New York Times, the Halliburton loophole, established in 2005, exempts fracking from many of the nation's environmental protection laws, including safe drinking water. So what happens? We don't have a way to regulate what's going on. So research aside, we can't even regulate what's going to happen with the fracking industry. We can do all the research we want, and it's not going to be worth the risk because we cannot regulate what is going on. So with that, I will stand for cross-examination. Yes, sir.
Judges ready? All of your off-case arguments say that fracking's risky, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay, and that's in the status quo, like currently fracking is risky.
Yeah, and they're actually planning to increase information levels.
Okay. Now you also, in order for us to do research into fracking, we have to frack, right?
I suppose so.
Okay, so all of the risk in the status quo come up through research, right?
Again, but doing the research isn't actually endangering the public. You really need to show that there's a large-scale risk in today's case to actually prove that the research itself versus the fracking use is the problem.
Well wait, I don't understand. If fracking is bad because of all of the things that you listed, and researching requires us to frack, then in and of itself, all of your disadvantages exist because we have to frack, right?
Actually, all the disadvantages I listed today were all done measuring levels of air toxicity, water toxicity, as well as the earthquake risks. You don't actually have to frack to actually see those risks and see those out there. So I think a very small portion of the actual research is going into the actual fracking process, but a large process of it is actually measuring the results of it.
Okay, so if I frack, air quality gets bad, right?
Yes, you can.
So we frack in the status quo to get energy?
We frack in the status quo to get energy?
To get natural gas?
Yes.
Okay, and that causes all these bad problems, right?
It does.
In the research world, I'm going to frack, right?
Yeah, it's not worth the risk, though, if you can't do anything about it because it's too dangerous for the U.S.
But the point of research is to make it safer, right?
The point of research is to say whether or not it is safe. At this point, it's pretty much safe as it's going to be. We don't have any proof at all that it's going to get any safer.
Have you ever written a research project?
Yes, sir.
Okay, when you were writing your research project, you did it because you wanted to find something out, right?
Yes.
You wanted to find something out because it would help us come over the status quo.
Right, like finding out whether it's safe or dangerous.
So in order to do something, you have to take into account the implications of it as well, don't you?
The implications of research?
The implications of whatever you're studying.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to take that into account. That's the research itself, right?
Yeah, for sure. All right, thank you.
All right, thank you.
All the judges ready? I'm still just as thankful as I was the first time, so let's talk about the debate. Alright, okay, so group all of her off-case arguments about risk. I totally agree. Fracking's really, really bad in the status quo. That's why we have to do research right now. Like, she completely ignores the entire resolutional analysis that tells you we have to do research into fracking in order to address all the problems. She says that I don't tell you any risk, but she agrees that A, fracking causes all of these problems, B, you have to frack to do research, and C, these impacts come from whenever you frack. So that means all of her impacts are the risk of research into fracking. All of her disads are what we're talking about are risks. So the question is, does the affirmative show that researching into this outdoes these risks? Now, she agreed with me that whenever she does research, she does it because she's looking for the implications of her research. When we hired Einstein to work on the Manhattan Project, we didn't want him to bounce atoms around just to see what would happen. We had a point, and that was to make an A-bomb. The A-bomb was the implication of the research. That's what we're doing in this case. You have to talk about what the research can give you. We have to look at the analysis of what the research can give you to see how this research can affect us over the status quo. Those are the benefits. The benefits are what is derived from the research, and the risks are all of the things that she talked about. But remember, she even told you in her own speech that her disads, her entire off case, is smaller in the research world because we do it in isolated areas. So you have this really small research risk, and then you have all of the benefits that come from research. research. All of the dropped arguments. So let's just run through dropped arguments. Number one, the New York Times article from Jordan Howard that tells us that we can become energy independent. Sure, we get oil from Canada. So are they America? No. That still means we're dependent on other countries for oil. That's only 40% of our revenue. America only produces about 5% of our oil revenue. The other 55% comes from OPEC and mainly Venezuela. That still makes us dependent on other nations, and we still have to work to get away from that. That point's not completely dropped. Another drop point from that same article, that doing this gives us a 75-year stoppage in order to be able to use this energy until we have alternative energy. Another drop point, the economist argument, where I tell you that fracking allows us to make alternative energies. So this research, the implications are A, it's short-term gains, like the New York Times article, where it tells you that that ultimately doing these jobs and all these benefits come specifically from fracking. It's not non-unique, because without fracking, none of these jobs exist in the first place. Extend the Department of Energy card, where I tell you that it's cleaner, safer, more profitable, and create more jobs than anything we're doing in the status quo. That's a benefit she didn't address, and it outweighs a risk. Also, extend that there's a lot of oversight. She said there's no rules on it. The Fracking Responsibility and Awareness Act of Chemicals solves the problem. Vote out.
Moving into the case, I want to first talk about my opponent's points. He said I dropped a lot of his issues, so I want to go through and remind you about what I said about them. So first, in the energy independence, I did address that. I said we already have these alternatives. He specifically addressed the energy independence from the Middle East. Like I talked about, we're not fully dependent on them right now. And we also have these alternatives that are already there. He gives this idea of the 75-year blockage. Like I said, we have alternatives out there. I thought that addressed the 7-year blockage. If we can do something now that's already there that we know is safe. Now moving into his second point, again he goes into these viable ways to produce it, but he never really refuted all my refutations to it. The fact that these are all non-unique arguments towards his case doesn't go necessarily towards research of fracking, but research for anything, research for all these other alternatives out there. Finally, in his third point again about the safety of government, we look at the Department of Energy, and he says, this can be really good, but again, it's causing earthquakes and pollution. He says that Obama's in for it. Okay, that's great. But at the same time, it is causing research. Obama's funding the research, but they're not using what he's saying. My opponent is saying we should only look at the research, not the use. And so what I want to really make clear in this case is he kind of came up here and talked about in the very beginning of this case was that, well, you take my opponent's points, you group them all together, and it shows us the risk of the research. The majority of the research out there, though, as I've proven through all of the evidence I've given in my case, is measuring water toxicity, air pollution, and the earthquakes. You don't have to actually frack to do all this. All you have to do is measure things. So while it might be a small percentage, here my opponent hasn't given us any numbers about how much fracking is going on or any evidence towards what the actual risks of just the research have been, and not the actual use of it, we really don't know that this is a risk in itself to begin with. You can go in and say, well, the fracking itself is a problem, as I've shown you in my case, but it doesn't show you the research risks. Now, moving into my own case today, my opponent, like I said, he only groups together all my things and said that it proved his points, but he never disputed the fact that if all this is what the research shows, that all the research shows it's dangerous, it's not worth the risk to continue the research into it. Absolutely not. Because we are endangering our water pollution, we're endangering the people that this fracking is actually going to, we're endangering our air, the very air we breathe that has carcinogens in it from this, and we're endangering our environment with earthquakes. I'll give you so many examples of these. This is what makes the research not worth it, because it's not going anywhere. They haven't found anything positive or a good direction for this to go. So why continue it? And we don't know that the research even is a risk. Now, moving into my last point about unregulated. Again, my opponent never really hit this, that no matter how much research we do, the fact of the matter is the law states that we do not regulate this in accordance to our nation's environmental protection laws that included safe drinking water. You can do as much research as you want, but at the end of the day, it's not going to matter because you can't regulate it. Now, my opponent has kind of come up here and said, well, this research leads to us learning new things. The purpose of research is to find out whether this is safe or whether this is dangerous. It doesn't, research about water toxicity and how this is being done doesn't necessarily give us any solutions to any of these problems, especially at this time that we stop fracking and all these earthquakes are to stop in central Arkansas, we've shown that stopping it altogether is much safer than it is to continue it on. So with that, what I want to do is just give a few voters today, which I think are some really clear reasons that this is negative ballots in today's case. First of all, I want to talk about this cost-benefit analysis that my opponent has brought up. The cost of research. What cost? We haven't seen it. We haven't had that crucial evidence. We have evidence that fracking is a danger. Obviously, I've shown you that in my case, but not that the research is. And again, the large majority of the research out there is measuring things. The water toxicity is not necessarily doing the actual fracking. My opponent hasn't proven to us any statistics on what those levels are, how much fracking they're actually doing, and so on and so forth. My second voter for you today is that the risks cannot be worth it when you look at all the problems out there. When you look at the risks of fracking as it is right now, if you look at fracking and see that all it's doing is causing water pollution, air pollution, earthquakes, and it can't be regulated, that's our problem. It's not worth continuing research into something that is only leading us down that road. That, again, like I said, they're saying that these bigger faults can crack open the more we do this. So even the more research we do, even if we go with the fact that this is, they're actually researching with fracking, it's only going to open up more faults, cause more water pollution, that people cannot drink. People in Pennsylvania have lost drinking capabilities for water. And finally, the regulation point. No matter how much research we do, it doesn't matter in the end. It's not worth the risk because we can't regulate it. Thank you all again. I'll stand up for my opponent's last speech.
Is everyone ready? This debate really only comes down to two things: cost and benefits and research. Well, research for what it's for. We don't see, I think the negative has a hard time understanding what I'm talking about when I'm talking about research. It's like the Einstein example I gave you. We didn't tell Einstein to do something just to make an atom bomb arbitrarily. No, research exists to improve upon things, to create new things, and to make them work better. She completely missed the entire analysis of all of the responses that she says she answered. The problem is that each one of those pieces of evidence tell you one thing. Whenever we research into fracking, we have the potential to make a safer product. Whenever we research into fracking, we have the potential to create more jobs over the status quo than oil does. Yes, I understand that research in and of itself creates jobs, but that's not the point. The point is making renewable alternative energies through the research of fracking that she didn't respond to at all about biodiesel and ethanol. The point is about making a safer product that's viable in the long term that she didn't address at all. The point is about making more jobs in a safer environment that she didn't address at all. The point is that she told you there's one cause, and that's fracking. But she told you that all of the impacts that stem from fracking, all of her disads, all of her off-case, are smaller in fracking because we don't do it as much. Now, you don't just research to find data, sure, but once you have data, what do? You improve upon it. You make it better. And that's what all of the evidence that I have indicates that she doesn't address at all. That we can become energy independent. That we can get away from all of these other countries. That we can have this stoppage for 75 years while using a product that helps us make alternative energies to begin with. We can have a cleaner, safer environment. We can have more profitable environments. We can get all these energy benefits. And she says we're not regulating it, but she doesn't respond to the piece of evidence that tells you that Obama, in conjunction with 12 other agencies, are now working together to make sure that this is done as safely as possible. Her disadvantages are smaller in the affirmative world, and she doesn't address that because it's for research purposes. And because of the research that we do and the fracking that we do within research, all of the impacts that I talk about then become possible because of that minute cost. It's about costs and benefits. That's your weighing mechanism in today's round. And all of the evidence presented to you today shows that fracking is done at a smaller level with less output of all of her disadvantages, as well as can give us all of the positive things talked into the affirmative case. Vote affirmative.